Okay, I think we can start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Southeast Asia Policy Talk. Today's topic is focused on strengthening the agri-food system. As you know, agriculture is very important in Southeast Asia, not only in terms of contribution to GDP, but also in terms of employment generation in the region. In recent years, we experience, or the agriculture sector has experienced major challenges. One is climate change, leading to more extreme weather events driven from the global warming. This was worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic that created disruption in the supply chains and also shortages in agricultural labor. And finally, another major challenge is the high food inflation, the current scenario of price volatility that has been impacted by the Russian invasion on Ukraine. So all these challenges are compromising the role of the agri-food system to drive economic recovery, create employment, but most importantly, to put food on the table at stable and affordable prices for millions of people and ensure the supply of diverse foods necessary for a healthy diet. So this webinar is going to look into these factors that are threatening food security and what needs to be done by the different stakeholders. To discuss these issues, we have lined up an excellent panel of experts today. I would like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Kim Rosenwald, who is Deputy Country Director for the World Food Program in Indonesia. She held previously several positions in the WFP to improve nutrition portfolios, and she was the Nutrition Chief for Knowledge Management and Digital Innovation. Prior to joining the WFP, she held several senior positions in the NGO sector, including in leading Indonesia's Save the Children Health and Nutrition team. So glad that you are joining us, Jennifer, today for this discussion. Also with us is Mr. Dil Rahut from the ADB Institute. He's the Vice Chair of Research. His research focuses on agricultural, environmental, and natural resource economics, and he's currently implementing experiments and field research in agriculture and climate change in Asia. Next with us, we have another researcher, This is our in-house principal economist, Mr. Takashi Yamano, working in ADB's Economic Research and Regional Development Department. He conducts economic research and reviews project economic analysis, and he has also worked in the past at the International Rice Research Institute, among others. Next, we have Mr. Omer Safar, who is Principal Natural Resources and Agriculture Specialist in Southeast Asia Department. Previously, he has worked in IFAD and also UNOPS on work related to agriculture, food systems, and climate change. So welcome also to this panel discussion. And last but not least, we have Mr. Norula, who is investment specialist in the private sector operations department in ADB. He's part of the agri-investment team covering the Pacific region and identifying private sector operations to invest in, including debt equity investments. And previously, he worked with the Acumen Fund as the global head for agriculture. So welcome all of you. I think we have an excellent set of knowledge about the topic. So if you agree, we are going to start with a first round of questions, starting with Takashi, for instance. We know, Takashi, that agriculture has been very important in Asia, in Southeast Asia. And what has been the impact of the COVID-19 on agriculture? What causes also the current food prices scenario? What's going on, Takeshi? Let us know, please.
Thank you, Christina. I know 4 other experts are behind me, so I want to keep my comments very short and very simple. So as you mentioned, agriculture is important. 1/3 of Asia's workers are still employed in agriculture sector, and a large number of people, estimated 4 out of 5 poor people, are still in rural areas. So healthy rural area agriculture sector is important for Asia's development. Another COVID-19 pandemic, we recognize the importance of food security. Unfortunately, many people have fell under the poverty or fell under the hunger under the pandemic. I think Jennifer will mention more about this. However, under the crisis, we realized that the agriculture sector and the rural sector also provided safety nets for the people. Many urban poor people, urban workers returned to rural areas and stayed there. We have conducted research in Pakistan, and we found exactly that. So rural area provides some safety nets. In 2022, Russia's invasion in Ukraine has made already fragile situation worse. Together, Russia and Ukraine export 34% of the global export of wheat. We hear the news on the TV now about exporting wheat from Ukraine through Black Sea, but that hasn't happened yet. So that has kept the wheat price high. And also, Russia is a big exporter of fertilizer based on the natural gas. So the price of natural gas has increased, energy prices has increased fertilizer price because one kind of fertilizer is produced from natural gas, and then the production of fertilizer using minerals depends on energy prices. So so increased fertilizer price remains high and probably stay high. Altogether, the world food price has increased to 100 in index 160 compared with before the pandemic started. Let me stop here and let other expert come in.
Thank you, Takashi. I think it was very good to set up the context. Another question this time for Dil. We know that climate change is also affecting agriculture. What is the impact and what are the connections between climate change and agriculture in food security in the region? And can you let us know maybe some mitigation and coping strategies? I think you're on mute, Dil.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for these interesting questions. I think climate change and agriculture has a very important connections. So it's a very interesting question. And I'd like to first share with you something on climate change. I think like science has already established that climate change is real and it's happening. And we also, like you and I who are here today, have witnessed the manifestations of climate change, such as the recent heat waves in South Asia, flooding in different parts of the world, changes in the climate rainfall patterns. So we have also been witnessing these climate changes. And from our research in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, we also found that farmers are experiencing this climate change. Not only experiencing, they are also experiencing the higher frequency of this climate change. And these changes has been affecting their livelihoods. If you look at agriculture sector is both the victim as well as perpetrators of climate change. Agriculture, livestock, and land use change alone contributes to about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Beside that, like agriculture is also adversely impacted by climate change. Although agriculture affects all, climate change affects all sectors, but agriculture is the most vulnerable sectors to climate risks because agriculture is dependent on climatic conditions such as temperature, rainfall, and soil ecosystem. Further, in agriculture sectors, there are almost 570 million farms, of which 500 million are smallholder farmers who depend on less than 2 hectares of land. These smallholder farmers are poor, extremely vulnerable, and have limited resilient capacity, thus making agriculture sectors and food and nutrition very, very vulnerable to climate change. Now, there are studies that have found that 1 degree rise in climate change could reduce wheat yield by 5 to 10%. So that's quite significant. And also, another studies also have found that that rice yield would also experience similar level of reductions if climate change, if the temperature is to increase by 1 degree centigrade. And we also found similar kind of situation with maize and other crops. And there is a studies which says that if the temperature continues to increase at the current rate, then maize production would decline by 25% by 2030, and wheat production would decline by 17%. So just imagine that kind of impact on food productions could lead into food shortage, food price inflations, and also other associated impact. We can already see from Ukraine war, like a slight a decrease in wheat supply could increase hit the food price to such an extent. So if we have the reductions of all the crops across the world by 15 to 20%, we'll have a significant impact on the food price and hence poverty and our effort to attain zero hunger goal by 2030. And thank you, Cynthia. I'd like to pass it to my other colleagues.
Thank you, Dale. It's quite important, the connection between agriculture and climate change. Now, Jennifer, since you're a nutrition expert, you've been working on nutrition portfolios in Southeast Asia. What is the extent of the impact of high food prices on ensuring nutritious and affordable diets in the region in Southeast Asia?
No problem, unmuted. Can you hear me or no?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hear me, okay. Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to answer this question focused on kind of the connection between cost and affordability, and discuss it from the perspective of a nutritious diet. So there are multiple reasons why individuals, or why we see a low consumption of a nutritious diet. But in fact, affordability is often a significant driving factor. And in the current context that we're in, especially coming to this new normal or emerging from the pandemic, as we start to emerge from the pandemic, communities, households, and individuals have been through so many shocks. And now we're seeing the additional shock of an increase of global food prices, of course, brought on by the conflict and the war in Ukraine. We know that, of course, increase of prices and these shocks disproportionately affects those who are most vulnerable to malnutrition. And the point here is essentially when prices go up, then a nutritious diet becomes less affordable. And often then households and families and individuals need to make decisions about which foods they can afford to purchase to meet their energy needs. And often the foods that are more affordable are basic staples, which don't always provide a diverse diet and allow family or individuals, and especially those who are most in need of good nutrition, such as young children and pregnant and lactating women, to be able to afford the foods that they need for a nutritious diet. And now in today's context, of course, we're seeing things like the price of wheat going up globally around the world, and also, of course, vegetable oil or edible oil is going up, not to mention the cost of cooking oil as well. And although I think in the context of Indonesia, where I am based, we haven't seen the full impact of this. We know it's coming. We know that these prices are only going to make the situation worse. In some analysis that WFP has done, we've shown, and we've done this actually type of analysis in about 35 countries around the world now, but an interesting statistic to share from Indonesia, if we look at just an energy sufficient diet, so just enough calories at the household level, nationally, it's less than 1% could not afford that nutritious diet. Could not afford that energy diet only, right? Just meeting calories. But as soon as you start calculating the cost of adding, meeting sufficient vitamins and nutrients and protein, all of it all together, we then run into a situation where some areas of Indonesia, it's about 4% that cannot afford that diet. But in other geographic areas, it's as high as 53% of the population cannot afford that nutritious diet. So as those prices go up, you can see how a greater percentage of the population will really become vulnerable to malnutrition. And so I think as we're thinking about affordability and cost, we also need to really think about how that impacts at a household and individual level what foods can be consumed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yeah, it's really important to know that up to 53% cannot afford nutritious diet, and especially for young children and lactating women, that's a problem because it will impact the rest of their lives. Now, Omer, a question for you. What are the challenges facing agri-food systems globally and in developing countries in Southeast Asia at the present?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. Global food systems have been undergoing an unprecedented transformation over the past several decades. So I'd like to start with a couple of serious threats to global food security, which are often unrecognized. First, a global homogenization of taste and the emergence of a global standard diet. We can see that the global standard consumer or eater now obtains the majority of calories from 6 commodities only: wheat, rice, sugar, maize, soybean, and animal products. So the loss of diversity in crop, livestock, and fishery species is a serious threat to food security, and the widespread consumption of processed packaged food is a serious threat to nutrition. The second trend, a global standard food supply chain that has become highly concentrated. Just a handful of transnational corporations control the majority of global trade in the standard diet commodities. And the same is true for seeds, chemicals, processing, packaging, distribution, and retail. And the two are becoming increasingly combined through vertical consolidation. This can be seen as a risk to food security. So fewer commodities are consumed and few companies control the trade. Third, a global transport system that moves massive volumes of the standard diet commodities that feed billions of consumers every day through only a dozen key transit choke points. Like the Strait of Malacca, the Turkish Straits, the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, the Panama and Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandab, and the related coastal storage and logistics nodes. So massive food is passing through very few choke points. And a disruption to any of these choke points is a major threat to global food security. And we are seeing this so dramatically now with the Ukraine crisis. And especially as many countries have become super importers of the standard commodities, while a few countries are super exporters. Finally, and this has been mentioned previously, the planetary climate crisis. Food systems are, affected by changing temperature, rainfall, soil. I won't go into detail because it's been said before, but productivity is affected, production, food availability, and food systems are contributing to about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions and 80% of biodiversity loss, and consuming 70% of freshwater resources. Now, if we look a bit more specifically at Southeast Asia, diverse set of DMCs, I'll just touch on two common threads. First, structural challenges. Across 7 DMCs of Southeast Asia, agriculture employs 1/3 of the population, but only contributes to 1/6 of GDP. That means that labor productivity in agriculture is low, technological modernization is low, farm incomes are low, the sector is not competitive nor efficient. So in simple terms, there are just too many people still in agriculture. Second, the business environment. Every developing member country in Southeast Asia aspires for a modernized, competitive food system. But when you look at the business environment in these countries for private investment, they are not conducive to private investment. 4 out of our 7 DMCs do not even rank in the top 140 countries globally in terms of business environment. So this, of course, affects the competitiveness of food systems, domestic food systems, input supply, processing, packaging, marketing, food safety, and so on. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omer. You touched upon the business environment. So now Narula can go deeper into details about the main challenges facing the private food and agribusiness sector in Southeast Asia. Narula, please.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, everyone. I think from a private sector perspective, if I were to describe the main challenge in one phrase, it's been supply chain disruptions. And it's the result of 3 key factors, as already mentioned by panelists as well as by Christina. Number 1, climate change, COVID and related disruptions, and the commodity super cycle that we're currently experiencing. Now, what is the net impact on private food and agribusinesses? The net impact is uncertainty. If you don't know whether you'll get your supplies and at what price, you can't plan much into the future. So most of the businesses we see have put their CapEx plans on hold, and they've gone into a survival mode. And short-term liquidity has become much more of a priority than long-term financing. Now, this presented a very interesting dilemma for ADB because we were set up to do long-term financing. We were not set up to do short-term financing because the assumption was there's plenty of short-term liquidity in the market. And that reality kind of shifted at the time of the pandemic, where there's a lot of risk aversion, especially in the early days of the pandemic. And we saw businesses quickly running short of liquidity and bankers, investors not willing to step in to quickly plug in the liquidity needs. And, it led to a bit of soul searching for ADB in terms of what is our role as a development finance institution, and it had to be a role of stabilizer. So that led to a big shift for ADB from doing long-term capex financing to doing short-term financing. And I'll just give a quick example, and it's a very good example, although not from the region, but from India, where we were in discussions with one of the larger poultry companies in the country, and we were processing a capex loan for this company. They were planning to expand their feed mills and hatcheries. And in March 2020, when we approved the capex financing, COVID had hit India. And one of the first casualties from a agribusiness perspective was the poultry sector, which was hard hit because people thought that poultry was carrier of COVID. So overnight, demand vanished, prices crashed, and there was a crisis situation for the sector, which was otherwise fundamentally very strong sector. So we had to shift gears and mobilize emergency financing to support the company to sustain it through the crisis. So I thought it was a good example of the impact of COVID-19 and other disruptions that we're seeing on private food and agribusinesses and what that has meant for ADB. Let me just stop here.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it was a very, very clear example. Thanks a lot. So we're going to go to another set of questions. And Takashi, you discussed before what is going on right now, the current situation, the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture. But what are the prospects of the agriculture sector this year and next? How economic growth may be affected by the current scenario?
So this is a seminar for the Southeast Asia. So for Southeast Asia, for example, the food price inflation has been relatively low compared with other countries in Central Asia and Pakistan or Sri Lanka. The inflation has remained below 10%, and so as Jennifer mentioned, maybe in Indonesia she hasn't felt the full impact yet. However, I have one concern, which is the price of rice. The price of rice has been low and stable. And in fact, it's lower than before the pandemic started, despite the current condition. However, the increased fertilizer price and the fertilizer price is remaining high, and this may affect the production costs of rice production. In fact, in US has future market for rice, and future market for rice price index has increased to 140, where we take that January 2018 price as 100. So 120, this is the high level we haven't seen since the beginning of pandemic. And if we remember the beginning of pandemic, Vietnam imposed export ban on rice in April 2020. That sent a shock wave and then increased the price of future market price of rice to 140, around 140. And since then it's went down, and then the actual rice price, international price, has been still low. However, if we look at the future price in US, the rice price is likely to increase. We don't know how much, and I hope that will not happen. But if the rice price increases, then that will affect the consumers in the Southeast Asia, and then that will, put the pressure on the government. And I hope, and ADB and other organizations should encourage government not to impose trade restrictions. Since the beginning of the Ukraine crisis, 53 trade restrictions has been imposed by the countries in the world. But trade export bans on rice certainly will trigger a crisis. So I hope that that's not happen, but that is the concern. So this year and next year, in terms of agriculture production in Southeast Asia, we should pay attention to the rice production, especially use of the fertilizer, and then the estimated price, production, and pay attention to the trade rice international trade market. Having said that, increased rice price will benefit exporters, as it benefits the wheat exporters also. So so that's good for the exporting country. However, the net rice importers, such as the Philippines in Southeast Asia and then Nepal in South Asia, and it's concern for them. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Takeshi, for these insights into the near future or potential near future. Let's talk now about the Zero Hunger agenda that, Dil, you mentioned it before, which is the second SDG. What are the factors that are threatening the target of zero hunger, and what are some programs and that, for instance, Southeast Asia could implement to accelerate progress in this agenda?
Thank you, Cynthia, for this very important question. And many of the panelists here have already highlighted how important agriculture sector is, and why agriculture sectors and food and nutrition security is being threatened. So we can understand the importance of the ensuring food and nutritional security, and also making agri-food system more resilient to climate change and also to other shocks. So this is very, I think most of my colleagues have already said, but I would like to reiterate what they have said. I would like to highlight here that humanity, have made a significant progress in terms of food productions, thanks to green revolutions. Had green revolution not been there, I think our food productions would not have increased so substantially. If you look at globally, area under cereals, I'm just talking about cereals because I think as Cynthia and Takashi highlighted how important is cereals in our diet. It's an important source of energy for all of us. So I want to talk about cereals here. Globally, the area under cereal increased from 648 million in 1961 to 724 million hectare in 2019. However, the production increased from 877 million tons to 2,979 million tons. That is a significant increase. And I would like to point out that it's the Asia that actually contributed to this growth in productions. If you look at Africa, Africa have not experienced green revolutions as yet. So Asia, if you look at Asia, like Asia in 2019, the productions of cereals from Asia was almost more than 50% of the total global production. So imagine how important is Asia in global food security. So that's something that I really want to highlight. And we, besides cereals, we have also seen similar kind of trend in pulses, in sugars, and in tubers. However, despite having made such a significant progress, as Cynthia has pointed out, there's large number of undernourished people. In 2020, it's estimated that there are about 768 million people who are undernourished, of which more than half, that's about 480 million, live in Asia. So we are not yet out of the woods. We are still suffering from food and nutritional insecurity. So that's something that we really have to understand. And beside that, almost like if before we used to only think about food insecurity, nutritional insecurity, but now there is triple burden of nutrition, what you call the triple burden of nutrition, where large section of people are undernourished, but almost like 1.9 billion people are overweight, of which about 700 millions are obese. And the problem of micronutrient deficiency is very, very high. If you look at iron deficiency is close to about 1.92 billion. So likewise, the other nutrients like iodine, zinc deficiency is also very, very high. So where we stand, it's not. We have made progress. We have done very good job, but we are still not out of the woods. But now, moving forward, we have several challenges: the rising populations, the climate change, the problem of gender, poverty, and conflicts, as my colleagues have highlighted here. The problem of food waste. Almost 1/3 of food is being wasted, food waste and food loss. If we save those foods, almost like we can feed entire Africa. That's the amount of food that's being wasted and lost. And the problem of food safety. Almost 400,000 people die every year because of unsafe food, and they are mostly from Asia. And there is lack of awareness in the global communities. So this is making our target to achieve food and nutritional security even more challenging. And I think the solutions that we have in our hand is that we need to invest on adaptations to climate change, particularly for the smallholder farmers. And also, we also need to invest on climate change mitigation strategies. The other important thing that I'd like to point out is that we need to have regional cooperations. We all need to come together on food productions, food trade, disease monitoring, and exchange of knowledge and technology. There should be free flow of food productions under all circumstances. We should not engage in food protectionist behavior that we have seen under Ukraine war scenario. Regional cooperations in research and development in food, agriculture security, food and agriculture production is also very, very important. We have to reduce food waste and also improve food safety. So these are some of the solutions that we have at hand. There is challenge. The challenge is big, but we also have options. We also have willingness to meet those challenges. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Dil, for highlighting these solutions to address the current challenges. Jennifer, before you let us know the challenges in terms of having an affordable and nutritious diet, as you mentioned, energy sufficient diet. But what are the necessary tools and analysis that is needed to help design appropriate interventions, appropriate activities to deal with this agenda? And from your experience also in existing programs, what are the constraints that you are facing when implementing those?
So let me start with, I was trying to narrow this down to 3 points for 3 minutes, but I got stuck at 6 points. So maybe I can do it in 4 minutes. My point number 1 would be to really look at rigorous and regular frequent monitoring of prices and overlaying that with other indicators of vulnerability across the food system. So really understanding not just the prices, but actually what is affordable to the populations that are most vulnerable or falling into a state of increased vulnerability. And in reference to the previous speaker, I would say that we also need much better data and information on micronutrient deficiencies. I think across Southeast Asia, we're seeing that we don't have sufficient data. We might know that anemia is high, but we actually don't have sufficient data to be able to understand that. My second point is to make sure that we consider context. We've made some reference already to the difference between a rural and an urban situation and setting. In Indonesia, Philippines, other large countries, there's such variation across these large archipelagos. And I think, in my earlier example, I had mentioned, in some places you have 4% of the population that cannot afford a nutritious diet, and it's as high as 53% in other geographic locations. So making sure that our analyses don't get lost at the big national numbers that really hide significant pockets of inequality and especially in an urban context. My next piece would be to make sure that we are building on, so this is number 3, build on and develop existing systems. So how do we understand opportunities to enhance social protection systems, education systems, emergency response and disaster preparedness systems to really build in a better response and support communities and households and families. My fourth piece is number 4 is that we often say that improving a nutritious diet, people just need to eat better. They just need to make smarter choices. They just need, you know, if everyone just ate enough of fruits and vegetables, everyone would be fine. I don't want to take away from the value added of really well-informed social and behavior change and communication campaigns. One, I think we should probably learn from the private sector because they're much better at it than the rest of us in terms of marketing, and that we should really take a more innovative approach. But we also need to make sure that those interventions are informed by data and evidence and pricing. So I could tell a mom all day to feed her child a healthy diet, but if she can't afford it at the market, at the end of the day, nothing is going to change. And number 6, I think, is to, or number 5, pardon me, is to really make sure that we're looking at our analysis and our tools and our interventions based on a food systems approach. And so that we're really looking across the entire food system. I think if any of us, and whether that's WFP or ADB or anybody else, if we all intervene in one tiny spot of the food system, it doesn't actually, none of us can stand on our own. So we need to understand more the intersector and cross-sector bottlenecks and challenges, and our evidence work should really inform that. And actually, I think I'm going to save my next 2 points for the next round. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for highlighting the importance of the information needed, the data needed, and also how to communicate this information, no, to have behavioral changes. Now let's talk about what ADB is doing. Omer, how is ADB supporting governments across Southeast Asia in ensuring food security and strengthening food systems?
Thank you, Christina, thank you. So if we put together the various elements of the puzzle, we see that a transformation of food systems is required in ways that improve food security and nutrition, that protect natural capital, that are climate resilient, and that provide decent jobs and inclusive economic growth. Of course, this requires collaboration of government, businesses, civil society, communities, producers. It requires the scaling up of public and private financing to invest in sustainable and resilient food systems. And ADB published an excellent report on financing for food systems last year. And it requires quantum leaps in technology. Now, the good news is ADB is really scaling up its support for agriculture, natural resources, and food systems in so many ways. And we see it across Southeast Asia, for example. And the aim is to improve and integrate food production, processing, marketing, and distribution networks to generate incomes for producers, particularly small-scale producers who are vulnerable, returns for agribusinesses, employment opportunities for the poor, women, vulnerable groups, and so on. So what are the type of forms of support that we are providing? Okay, policy reform is at the top of the agenda. Country-level policy reform for an improved enabling environment for agriculture sector growth, for sustainable use of natural capital, and climate resilience. And for example, we have 2 policy-based loans in the Philippines, as well as policy components and other projects. Improved management and climate resilience of natural resources. For example, more efficient and sustainable ways of managing water resources, including irrigation systems, flood control, mainstreaming climate resilience and risk management, ecosystem stability, biodiversity, conservation across the agri-food sector. These elements are present in all our operations in the region. And ADB is now coming up with a natural capital lab, which will provide a lab to come with further technological advances and financing for these areas. Another key segment of our work is upgrading agriculture value chains. And this includes productive and market infrastructure, skills development for producers and stakeholders, organizing producers, technological advancement, climate smart technologies, digital solutions. Very important, financing, financial services for producers and agribusinesses, business services, and as was said before, strengthen food safety. And good examples are value chain investments in Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and others. And this allows entry points for our private sector operations, which I'm sure Nurullah will talk about shortly. Promoting nutrition-sensitive agriculture. This is a growing area for us. Diversified farming systems, safe and healthy food, and so on. And for example, we have a very strong nutrition focus in ongoing and upcoming projects in Lao PDR. And finally, there are two cross-cutting themes across the portfolio. One is mainstreaming gender across sector policies, strategies, women's equal access to resources, assets, technology, services, markets, nutritional improvement for adolescent girls and women of reproductive age, women's access to water, sanitation, hygiene. And the second one is promoting regional cooperation, as Dil mentioned before, cross-border trade in food products, a harmonization of food quality standards across the ASEAN region, transboundary livestock disease control, and so on, working with partners. And I think our GMS, our Greater Mekong Sub-Region Program, is a very fine example in this respect. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Omer. Good to know the wide variety of interventions that the ADB is doing in the agriculture sector. You mentioned the policy-based loan for the Philippines on climate change. I think it's the first of its kind by ADB that potentially will be replicated in other regions. So I'm sure, Omer, many people will ask you for some advice on that one. And finally, Nurullah, as our private sector expert, how is ADB supporting this agribusiness agenda and overcoming the challenges that you mentioned before?
Sure. Thanks. So as I explained in the context earlier, we've had to shift gears, reorganize our processes, and re-strategize given the disruptions from COVID and climate change and the commodity super cycle. And the shift has been towards short-term liquidity support away from long-term capex financing. In this context, the one subsector that became increasingly important for us in the food and agri space was international commodity merchants. They became important because they were moving commodities from regions which had excess supply to regions which had excess demand. So they were the market makers connecting buyers and sellers internationally. They became hugely important to mitigate the impact of supply chain disruptions that we've been experiencing. Not only could they arrange alternative sources of supplies through their international networks, but they were also reliable off-takers for many of these commodities directly from the farmers, hence having a direct impact on farmer livelihoods. So over the last couple of years, we've had a serious effort in deploying capital to support these agri merchants. Over the last 2 years, ADB on the private sector side has deployed over $300 million to support the food and agribusiness space, bulk of it going towards short-term financing. And we have an active pipeline of another $300 million over the next 2 years. Just to share a couple of examples of our short-term financing, we have provided a $100 million facility to Lois Dreyfus, which is a large agri merchant, to finance smallholder farmers during the pandemic, covering coffee, cotton, and rice farmers across India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. We've also provided TA support to help train farmers, especially women farmers, on climate resilience, with a focus on cotton in India and coffee farmers in Indonesia. quite similar financing to Olam in 2020. It was a COVID response transaction, $90 million plus financing across Vietnam, Indonesia, and PNG, covering coffee and cocoa farmers. And we've had similar financing with Ecom, which is a Swiss-based agri-merchant across their operations in Southeast Asia. I think just to sort of round up on this point, there has been such a shift in focus to short-term needs, to firefighting because of the pandemic and the commodity super cycle. I fear that there's not been enough investing done in the long-term capacity building of the sector. So at some point, we need to now begin to shift. While providing support to short-term working capital needs, we need to gear up and plug the financing gap to support long-term capacity building in the food and agribusiness space. If in the absence of that, I fear that we'll come across serious supply shortages in the coming years. So I think that with that lens, we're now beginning to balance out our portfolio between short-term financing and long-term financing. Let me just stop.
Thank you very much. Now we want to hear questions from the audience. We start our Q&A session. Feel free to raise your hand and ask the question, or you can type the question on the chat and I'll read it for you. So I'm inviting questions from the floor. If anybody has a question or comment, I see that there are more than, I think, about 87 participants from many regions. I see from Nepal, from Malaysia, of course, from Southeast Asia. We have one question, how ADB is helping for the agri-food system in Bimbiaga region. Anybody that is working on Bimbiaga? Maybe Dulce, if you can probably explain what Bimbiaga region is, and then they can better understand what type of grouping we are talking about.
Thanks, Christina. Just to inform everyone, Bimbiaga refers to a regional program, and that includes Brunei, Darussalam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. I see Omar's hand raised. Maybe we can refer to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. ADB is very active in agri-food systems in Philippines and Indonesia. In Philippines, we have work on irrigation, flood management. We have investments in value chains for high-value commodities. We have investments for good, proper management of environment, for example, in the Cordillera and other major river basins, agroforestry, watersheds. We have a new investment, actually a policy-based loan to help the government with its policy reform agenda on climate change. We have one on rice tariffication and competitiveness on agriculture. In Indonesia, similarly, we have a lot of work on water resources, irrigation management, flood control. We have value chains, aquaculture. We're coming up with shrimp aquaculture perhaps next year. We have work on natural resources. So we have quite a solid and large agriculture sector portfolio in these two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mer. Let me invite the other questions from the floor. if you want to chat, to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Another comment is from the Philippines. Everyone in the world is facing a price hike in fertilizer. How ADB can help on addressing this? And the asking is if ADB should offer alternative training and seminars or investment in organic agriculture. Is there anybody interested in responding to this question from the panelists? Dil, thank you. Yeah. You're on mute, Dil.
I think organic farming is very important because I come from Bhutan, a small country, and I was born and I grew up in the farms, and I had been also working in Africa, Latin America, and Asia in agriculture farming system. So I believe that, like, most of the food that we eat is some contaminated with pesticides and some heavy metals. So somehow organic farming has a very important place, in the sense that there is huge demand for organic farming. And in some of the states in India, like Sikkim and even Bhutan, where we are encouraging organic farming so that we can provide healthy food to the largest sections of the population. So I strongly believe that if there is a room for ADBI to support organic farming as well as system agriculture, in the sense that when we looked at agriculture today, agriculture, livestock, and forestry nexus. I think in these three contexts that Omar highlighted, somehow if ADBI could promote that would also help in boosting organic farming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that Takashi also raised his hand. Do you want to address this question?
Yeah, thank you very much. So organic farming is one way on one end, but more importantly or immediate is that to use the fertilizer more efficiently. So for this purpose, the ADB is having a policy dialogue with our member countries, have projects on integrated land and water and nutrition management, and also have projects on the use of new types of fertilizers. More maybe the Omar and Nuron can comment more on it. So this is a good time to engage and discuss with our member countries to encourage them to use fertilizer more efficiently. The unused fertilizer remaining in the field will evaporate as methane and other greenhouse gas and then contribute to the more the emission of greenhouse gas. So use of fertilizer, efficient use of fertilizer, efficient use of water is important. It's a important bridge to the organic farming in our member countries. Let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Omer, you want to also comment on the organic?
Yes. I'll be quick. I'm delighted with the question on organic farming because, Christina, as you know, in our recent climate change policy-based loan to the Philippines, we have 5 elements in agriculture and environment, and one of the reform agenda is organic agriculture. And during the review process of the policy agenda, I was asked many times, why is that organic so important? Maybe we should delete it. And I was saying, no, it's very important. So I'm delighted with the question. Organic, it locks carbon in soil. It doesn't use chemicals. It protects biodiversity. It provides safe and healthy food. It is good for women because it's typically practiced in the homestead. It's good for indigenous people like in the Cordillera. And what we are helping the government of the Philippines to do is to restructure the subsector governance through the National Organic Agriculture Program known as the NOAP with a new board, which will be the NOAB. And I think most importantly, we're helping the Philippines to set up a participatory guarantee system for organic agriculture. Today, the number of certified producers organic in the Philippines is very small because it's an extensive process to get certification. The rest of the world has moved on and made participatory guarantee schemes where there's a participatory guarantee system and it's accredited. And if there's a lapse through audit and it's not organic, you lose your scheme for like 5 years. And this is going to unblock the number of certified producers and really scale up organic. So thank you for this question.
Thanks, Omer, for your answer. Now there is a question on public-private partnerships. This is for you, Noor. How can public-private partnerships be used to help strengthen the agri-food system?
Sure. So I think this is quite an important question, especially in the context of food and agri. You know, from a public sector perspective, if you look at the food and agri ecosystem, one of the key elements that drives production and yield is access to quality extension services. And private sector players, no matter how big, they're not able to provide extension support at a scale that the public sector is able to with their local networks and local infrastructure. So what we have been seeing in some of our investments is some of the larger merchants that I mentioned earlier partnering with the public sector, especially the extension networks, to support the farmers at the local level, including focus on capacity building, climate resilience training for farmers, which works for the benefit of both. The public sector obviously benefits because they have an interest in farmers being better off, being more productive, creating more surpluses, and the private sector is looking for more sustained supplies from the farmers. So I think within the public-private partnership domain, the partnership around extension services and extension programs in many of our markets is a prime candidate for public-private partnerships within the food and agri systems space. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe Dil wanted also to intervene.
Thank you, Cynthia. Christina, sorry. My question, it's not an answer, but I'd like to throw this something very interesting to the panel that I have been encountered during my research. One of the things that I have encountered, because here we have such an interesting panel, so I thought I'll put it to the panel to make it more, which we have not discussed here. Like in developing countries, if you look at India or Nepal or anywhere, agriculture is not a career of choice. Today, people are in agriculture because they have no other options. And you have seen that because large number of people from Nepal and other countries have migrated, leaving only old elderly people in the farms, which has created shortage of labor. So when we are already encountered with so many other challenges, environmental challenges, that's stopping the productions, and where mechanization cannot happen in the mountains area. So that's something that I always thought that what could be the solutions in that context. So I was thinking that maybe I should share these interesting things that I have been asked every time with the panel.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, you want to add?
I just wanted to maybe nuance the point a little bit on the public private sector. And when we look at populations that are most vulnerable and would benefit from social protection systems and improved access to affordable, nutritious foods, the connection between the public and private sector becomes absolutely essential, and I think is an area which we need to build on significantly. I think from my perspective, the public system can learn so much from the private sector. I made reference earlier, especially in marketing or increasing demand for nutritious foods. And in terms of looking at the public sector, really finding efficiencies and improving supply chains in how to reach vulnerable populations and those that are left behind. And so I think by coming together and really having policies and programs that are informed not only by the expertise within the private sector, but really informed by the importance of expertise in the agricultural sector and in supply chain, logistics, and so forth and so on. So really looking at that food systems approach again and recognizing that, you know, getting food from the field to the fork or to the plate or into someone's mouth is really a joint collaborative process that engages public-private sector. I think also when we're looking from a public sector perspective, really understanding what policies are in place to ensure an enabling and conducive environment to promoting and increasing a more diverse production of food. The comment made earlier about the, you know, narrowing in on 6 commodities and that's it to fulfill people's consumption. I think that was a really, really critical point and probably one that, you know, some good public-private partnerships need to be built around tackling that one. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Takashi, you wanted to come in as well?
Yeah, on the several front, because the Deo has raised questions about involvement of young people in agriculture. Where I see the only place where I see young people coming in is the area where they become rural entrepreneur. So rural entrepreneurs in different areas. For example, machine providers. You know, young people who have experience in urban areas of using machines, you know, they come in as rural entrepreneurs and then provide machine services to the farmers. So that's one area young people come in. And the other very niche market, small market, young people get excited about business opportunities. That's where the young people come in. So they come in as a, you know, intersection of private, you know, bringing in private interest in it. They are not going to just succeed their parents' farm activities as happened in the past. So that's private sector intervention. I also wanted to. So one other area where I see the flux of young people coming in is the aquaculture. So aquaculture has expanded in Asia. You know, we more than half of the seafood that we consume worldwide come from aquaculture now, and Asia is the main spot of aquaculture. Someone mentioned, maybe Omar mentioned about aquaculture ADB supporting in Indonesia, but other countries like Vietnam and so on. So we need to be careful about the environmental impact of aquaculture and so on. But we focused aquaculture in the Asian Development Outlook 2021 we published. So that's the area also the young people coming in, and they use technology, digital technologies to learn about aquaculture production. If you check YouTube's and so there are so many videos of aquaculture, and then the aquaculture producers actually have many Facebook groups. They exchange information and so on. So that's the exciting area. One more in the comments, questions about zero emission in Vietnam. And so that's also a area where that the young people's efforts can be very important. The 2 major sources of the emission coming from agriculture is a paddy rice production. Under the water of paddy production, under the soil, that's the methane gas is produced and it's emitted to the air. So that's one source. The other source is from large livestock like the cattle. So in Asia, the paddy rice production is very popular. So that's where that we can try to reduce the methane emission from paddy. And there is a technology used, alternative drying and wetting. But so there are some method to try to reduce the emission, but I don't want to go into because we have no time. But these new areas, maybe the young people can come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takashi. And another question on how do we ensure that the agrofishery programs that we are funding, they can benefit the ordinary citizens? Maybe I can ask Noor to come in on that one, since you're working on operations. Yeah.
Sorry, Christine, which question are you referring to?
What can ADB ensure that the agrofishery programs that we are funding, they can benefit the ordinary citizens?
Sure. So it's interesting because we're just beginning to look at aquaculture right now. We have one or two conversations in the pipeline. We don't have a investment in the aquaculture spaces yet, but so it would be interesting to see how our exposure in the aquaculture space is able to provide access to quality, cheap proteins to the masses. I think that's the play that we're focusing on. The demand for aquaculture is rising in Asia, and there's a shortage of supply, and that is what we are aiming to plug through investing in the aquaculture space. And the hope is that with increased supply, you'd have access to high quality proteins at a low price for the masses. I don't know if that adequately answers the questions, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Dil, you raise your hand. Is this an old hand or a new hand?
And sorry, that's an old hand.
Okay. Okay. Maybe looking at another question, that they want to know how ADB prioritize problems faced by the small holders, given their situation of more vulnerable and lack of resources. What is the role that ADB play in bringing multiple stakeholders to solve these issues as holistically as possible? Maybe this is something that WFP can also provide some insights as well in order to bring in all the stakeholders together. But Omer, you want to comment on this one from an operations perspective? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for the question. When we design investment projects, there's a lot of diagnostic and analytical work that happens before we structure an investment. And there's a lot of village level participatory rural appraisal sort of processes as far as agriculture and natural resource projects are concerned, where there's a methodology to find out the needs, the problems, the constraints, the opportunities for smallholders. And the participants themselves prioritize their problems, then we see where the investment will fit, where it will not fit. Bringing stakeholders together, we do that a lot. For example, we do it in value chain projects where we bring organized producers, traders, market intermediaries, processors, bring them together, financiers, see if we can set up a contract farming arrangement or a tripartite arrangement between a financial institution, a group of producers, and a market, things like that. So there's a number of avenues where we bring stakeholders together, but it all starts with a diagnostic of the problems, the priorities, and the opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Omer. Jennifer, you want to comment on bringing the stakeholders together?
Sure. No, I agree with this previous comment. I mean, certainly WFP as well really focuses on bringing stakeholders together, and really with that focus on the cross-sector piece is really key to much of our work. I think also in terms of understanding at a subnational and really local level, understanding what vulnerabilities are and what defines and how we can sort of identify the most vulnerable households And so really kind of digging into that data and information to understand better how to target programs if they are specific WFP programs, but also how to inform with evidence the targeting of government-led programs. And I think something that's also absolutely critical is to understand where current climate shocks and natural hazards and emerging climate change and sort of looking ahead, where those vulnerabilities are shifting and changing, and we're working more and more towards how to respond early, how to anticipate using evidence, and then to inform an earlier response, really focused on enhancing resilience and ensuring that households are supported before a disaster strikes and in anticipation of climate shocks. So that's also a way that we're really trying to use more evidence and build on government systems. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. I see there is a question from the audience that she wants to ask directly, Ms. Irene Custodio. Please, you can go ahead and make your comment. I see you have your hand raised. Hi, Ms. Irene. I think you are on mute. We cannot hear you. It appears that is mute still. Ms. Custodio. Yeah, I think we're having some technical problems. Yeah, let's say later on you can actually ask the question directly if your mic goes on unmute. There is another question on what are the initiatives, the research initiatives that are being implemented now in terms of food security, etc. Maybe I can ask Dil, what type of research you are now doing. You mentioned you are doing some field research experiments on, about agriculture and climate change. Maybe what is the new thinking in terms of research on climate change and also on food insecurity?
I just want to, beside ADB, I think there are CG centers also who have been extensively working on food security, and Takashi also has the former hat from IRI. I used to be at CIMMYT for over a decade. So we in those institutions we have been working in developing drought tolerant varieties of maize, wheat, rice, saline tolerant varieties of rice, and also water resilient varieties, seed varieties, and different kind of varieties of technologies are being produced. But then in order to compensate for nutrient deficiency, we are trying to come up with zinc enriched wheat, vitamin enriched wheat. So but the problem is that we try to scale out. We had large projects in Africa and Asia. The challenge was that it's very, very difficult to scale those technologies, despite the fact that this technology has proven in the field, in the experiments, to provide better yield and resilient to climate. But farmers are not willing to take on this technology. That's one challenge that we have been facing. And some of the research that at ADBI we are doing is we are doing randomized control trial on soil health. In India, we are trying to see how the soil health card is helping people to change soil management practices. We have relay cropping in Bangladesh and several other projects in Nepal and also in Bhutan on climate change and adaptations in agriculture among farm households. So there are a number of projects, but yeah, one of the major challenges we are facing is how to scale the technology that we have developed.
Yeah, thank you. Takashi, you want also to intervene in terms of research?
So as Dale mentioned, I used to work at the International Rice Research Institution, and the area I worked is the distribution of the climate resilient agriculture, and so particularly the flood resilient rice in South Asia. As Dale mentioned, it's very difficult to scaling up. And for this, private sector collaboration is necessary. The working with seed private companies was crucial in South Asia. And now we see that expansion and the adoption of such variety in the northern part of Bangladesh and eastern part of India. And because that the flood happens so often, and then the private companies are distributing these seeds. So it takes time for the distribution of new technology, but with the help of private sectors, the technology that has a high demand eventually gets distributed. And not only the climate resilient side, the new exciting one now is the low GI rice, where it's more healthy rice for reducing the what's that? Yeah, anyway, so such a healthy rice products are also coming up. So these climate resilient technologies, as well as the private, more healthy rice and other crops, are very important. And then these are the areas that new research is going in.
Thank you.
Let me stop. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's see if from the audience, Ms. Irene Custodio can unmute herself if you want to ask any question. Ms. Custodio? If not, we move to Mr. Ramon Tamayo. I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to come in and ask any question? Mr. Ramon Tamayo? Okay. Since it's almost time, but we wanted to take this opportunity to have some takeaway messages from the panelists. If you have further questions, by the way, they can respond in written as well. So you can send us the question, and then the panelists later on, they can respond to you. But in the meantime, just to finalize, some parting messages or parting takeaway messages that you want to share in a couple of minutes. Maybe I start with Jennifer.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. So in my previous answer, I think I gave 5 or 6 points, and now I'm going to give you sort of my final 3 takeaway from this conversation. My first one, and this connects back to public-private partnerships, but also addressing micronutrient deficiencies, that large-scale food fortification is a cost-effective method to really address micronutrient deficiencies, and determining how to make fortified foods available and affordable to those who face the most challenge in affording a diverse and nutritious diet is a key public health action, and one which WFP is working towards globally, and especially also as well here in Indonesia. My second piece, my second point is, again, to really use data to inform the earliest action possible that is adapted to context. It is context relevant and really reaches those who are typically the furthest left behind in food security and nutrition. And then my third and final point, and really just an appreciation as well to all of the partners who are here and representatives from public, private sector, and development partners. It is critical that we continue to invest in a dialogue and discussions and improve public-private partnerships. And I strongly believe that UN agencies such as WFP, as well as ADB and the many other development partners can really play a convening role, bringing together the public and private sector and creating a platform for that discussion for improved agriculture and improved nutrition across the very large populations in Southeast Asia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope my comments contributed as well to the thinking of all participants. As we say,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and for your insights. Now, any departing message, Norula, since I'm following the line in my computer.
Sure. So I think 3 key messages from a private sector perspective. One, we should support bringing successful business models to smaller markets in the region. I think that's something we at the ADB private sector are actively seeking to do. Second, climate finance has to be really front and center. That is the systemic risk we're facing, and we should not let short-term shocks, steer our focus away from that strategic threat. And lastly, we need to support competition in the private sector, avoid creating monopoly and oligopoly structures, something that we need to be mindful as we invest on the private sector side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Omer, any takeaway messages?
I'll be very quick. First message is, let's diversify what we eat. Let's diversify what we produce, and let's diversify how the food is transported. The second message is, let's try to reduce the risk of the very high concentration in global food systems. And the third one, from my agriculture's perspective, is just a reminder to everybody that there's only one culture, and that's agriculture. And without agriculture, there will be nothing. Thank you.
You're right. You're right. I agree. Takashi, any last message to share with us?
I have only one message, which is the importance of sharing information, getting information, sharing information. Today's lesson, this information sharing, we have learned a lot. So this is very important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dil, you want to share any last message with us?
Yes, I think I would like to reiterate the points that my colleagues here have made. One is data. I think data is very important, and in Asian context, that's lacking, unlike Africa, where we have several panels data across several countries on agricultures and households. So that's something that I would like to urge. Second is that we have to invest in R&D. We cannot ignore R&D in agriculture. So investment in agriculture is very important. And the third one is linking farmers to the market, both input and output market. That's crucial. And last one is adaptations, investment on adaptations to climate change, because by the time we are aiming for carbon neutrality by 2050, but that's a long distance time. So until then, we really need to help farmer adapt to the climate shocks, like the disease outbreak and climate-related shocks. And let's not waste food. If we save food, we can actually save millions of lives. We are wasting a lot of food. I think by reducing food waste, I think that's an area where we can actually ensure food security. There's very little room for us to increase the land size. And the only option is either increasing the productivity or reducing the wastage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So with this, I think we are going to close the session. It was a very informative session. Thank you very much for all the panelists to share their knowledge and their insights with us. If there is any question that remain unanswered, we can get back to you in written. So don't worry, and thanks a lot for all the participants that took the time to attend today's seminar. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a
Thank
good day.
you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very
you.
much.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, dear panelists.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.